Welcome to a Leader's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Joel Gunn, and today I have with me Bo Carrington back on the show. Bo, welcome back.
Good to be back.
Your last episode was well received by the viewing community, so and you and I always have fun chatting, so I wanted to get you back in here. It's almost been a year. Can you believe that?
No, I didn't realize it had been that long. No.
It's getting close to it. Actually, by the time this airs, it probably will be right at a year. Was looking at the information the other day. But before the show, and as we were getting ready for this, you were talking about some things that are really at the kind of the front of your mind recently, and that being strategic thinking. You see a lot of leaders just kind of struggling. You know, the world's chaotic right now. We're most, I guess, effectively we're out of the pandemic, but I think it still left some battle scars and some timidity, maybe where there should be a little more courage. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. What are you thinking on that?
You know, it's I'm not sure the pandemic is what actually led to where I'm at right now, because in all the years that I've been in business, this is something that I've seen. But it's really more about the strategic mindset, is that we tend to live as humans in the moment. When we make decisions based off of how we feel, which is created by the circumstances immediately around us. And we don't put a lot of forethought into where that decision will lead us, other than outside of the feeling that we don't want right now or the problem that we're dealing with right now. And in a lot of conversations lately, I've been able to help people see that the decisions they're making now are actually going to create more problems going forward as they try and get to where it is they're trying to go, because they're not making decisions with the right mindset.
What do you think is contributing? Let's see if we can understand their current mindset, maybe what's contributing to that, and then we can contrast that with the kind of mindset that we have or should have.
You know, I think it's probably human nature more than anything else. If I'm hurting, I want to get rid of the pain. I'm not worried about what's causing it. I just want to get rid of it.
Doctors appreciate that.
Yeah, so it's I know. It's that immediate relief that we're after, and there's also some convenience and that immediacy of getting what it is that I want. And I don't think that we are, society, I think, says it's all about now. It's all about let's do it now. Let's not think about what am I doing now as it relates to what I want to do tomorrow. And I think it gets businesses in a lot of trouble. They're making decisions. And I don't want to call it in a vacuum, because it's not in a vacuum. They're just making decisions without really considering the decision that they're making, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Is it, do you think they're feeling pressured, or do you think it's just a muscle they don't exercise a lot?
I think it's both. I think there is some pressure. People feel like, again, I'll use pain as the example. They're feeling pain, so they have pressure to get relief from the pain. So they go take an aspirin. It kills the pain, but it doesn't kill the problem causing the pain. So there's that immediate relief. But I also think, too, that there's a muscle that we don't use enough, and it's the pause, reflect, think muscle that allows me to think in terms of time. And that's the biggest one that I see with a lot of the leaders that I've worked with over the past few years, is that they're not thinking in terms of time.
These leaders you've worked with, are they young, old, big business, little business?
All over the place. I mean, this goes back to my coaching days working with Fortune 50 leaders. I saw it there, just like I see it now working with a $2 million top line business. And I think it's because it's human nature more than it is anything else, and not necessarily in business either. We do it in parenting. You know, we make decisions based off the here and now without really stopping to think about what that can do tomorrow or a year from now or 10 years from now with our kids. We try to think, but because we have that immediate need of relief.
Do you think there's do you think there's this tendency with leaders, like maybe it'll heal itself, like kick the can down the road, it'll just, or is that where you're going with this, or is it, are you going a different direction?
No, it's not really that. I don't think they think about it.
Okay.
What you just described, there is some of that happens, but that's knowingly making decisions to avoid something. And again, if I want to get rid of pain, I take medicine, get rid of the pain, but I don't solve the problem. Yeah, it could be viewed as kicking the can down the road, but I don't think they're thinking about that. I don't think they think about the problem.
Resolve the now.
They're resolving the now, the pain, the discomfort.
I'll give you a second to think about this, but do you have any examples maybe of where you've seen that wouldn't give away who your client was? Or
Yeah, the easiest example, I can go back, and I'll go way back so that I don't cross anything that I shouldn't. Go back in my days in HR, working with some large companies in town. I would work with a supervisor or manager that needed to take an action with an employee. They would come to me and they'd say, "Hey, I need to fire this employee." Okay, well, tell me why. And they'd walk me through what happened. And I'm like, okay, so do you really want to fire the employee or do you want to solve the problem? And they'd look at me and they go, "What do you mean?" I'm like, well, you can fire the employee, but you're not going to solve the problem that led the employee to do what it is you're firing them for. And they would just look at me and I'm like, I'll ask you again, do you want to fire the employee? If so, tell me, and I'll show you how to do it legally. Or do you want to solve the problem? And it would finally click that the employee wasn't the problem. It was either the system that the employee was in, or it was something that the supervisor or the manager was doing that led the employee to do what they did. Not saying what the employee did was right, but their behavior, their action was an outcome of something else. And invariably, I would help the manager get there, but it was one of those moments, they didn't stop to think. They didn't think in terms of time. They only knew what they were looking at in terms of a behavior that they couldn't tolerate.
Yeah. And I found the same thing coming at it from a different angle. You're in the HR suite and I'm out in the operations, and even in simple things like a Kaizen and Lean or Six Sigma events, a lot of times leadership would say they're broken. They'd use fancier words than that, but that was the essence of the message, right? My people are broken. Can you go fix them? And I would say a vast majority of the time, maybe as high as in the 90%, it wasn't the people that were broken; it was the process. And it didn't run into, in my experience, it didn't run into a lot of times where the manager was throwing things out of, or the supervisor was throwing things out of balance. Even in that case, it was the system that they were trying to play within. And so we just reset the system to be, more common sense, which isn't, but
spend a little bit of time dealing with that as well.
And so I've definitely seen it. What you're describing is people don't take the time to try to understand the root cause, which is what you've said, whether that be in medicine or with kids or with employees, and so I guess my question, and it may be redundant to one I asked earlier, but what do you think the root cause is why they're not looking at the root cause besides pain, if there is one?
I think part of it, again, is that, you understand a little bit about how the brain works. And
a little bit.
The thinking part of our brain does not like to work. It's the subconscious that does the majority of everything that we need done on a daily basis. The thinking part's pretty lazy. And if the thinking part can go without working, it's going to go without working. So we tend to be very reactionary.
That's why when my wife says, "What are you thinking?" I say nothing.
That's exactly right.
Okay. We finally solved that one.
But I think it comes down to, and it's the same thing that prevents us, we're talking about critical analysis backwards, but it's the same problem that we have that prevents us from doing critical analysis forward, which is the true systems thinking when we make decisions. It's that part of our brain that doesn't want to work. We know something, therefore we're going to do something, but we don't analyze what it is that we know or why we know it. And the subconscious brain is a dangerous thing to trust.
Can be. What do you, as you've coached leaders, what are some of the tools or methodologies or paradigms, the mindset, as you said at the beginning? What are some of those things? Where do you start to take them once they realize this is a challenge?
The thing that I love to do, and I heard this from another consultant years ago, but it's talking to leaders about taking balcony time. So you think about this: if I'm living in my business down here, it's hard for me to see what's really going on around me beyond what's right in front of me. So the example that I used it yesterday in a conversation. I said, if you're standing in the middle of 5 rows of dominoes that are set up like we used to set up as kids, where you touch one and they all fall. I said, if you're standing in the middle of 5 rows, you only see one domino on each side of the row. You have no idea where that row actually goes. And I said, so you don't know which one to touch, which one to knock over. Balcony time allows you to step above your business and look down to see where things are leading. And so this is that, we talk about a big picture. It's that big picture view that allows us to make good, wholesome, thoughtful decisions. The problem with that, couple things, is number one, it takes time. It means that I have to slow down, pull out, and view. Second thing is that it's not in our nature, in most people's nature. They don't think big picture. They think right here in front of me, I've got to make this decision. One of the, as I was thinking through the conversation we were going to have today, one of the thoughts that came to mind, I go back to my military days, and, it's on the battlefield, the battle is important, but the battle doesn't dictate the war. And when you've got general officers that are sitting away from the battlefield, but they're taking intel that's coming in, they're looking at the battles and they're trying to strategically decide how to move resources, because they may be willing and may have to give up a battle to win the war. It's that big picture thinking that allows us to make good strategic, meaning time-bound and wet decisions that allow us to actually achieve what it is that we're trying to achieve. And I think a lot of the leaders that I've worked with in the past, they don't do that. But more importantly, they also don't have a true vision for what it is they're trying to achieve. They may have words somewhere that they call a vision statement, but it's not a picture that they have in their head. And I think that's where really the strategic mindset starts. It's in the thinking part of our brain, where we're building out that vision for what it is that we're trying to achieve or where it is we're trying to go, so that then every time we step up onto our balcony to look down over our business, we can see the vision that we're after. We see which line of dominoes is going to get us closest to that vision.
Have you run into leaders that, I'm not sure this is the right word, but escape into the vision? In other words, they get there and now all they do is just always think about stuff and never do anything.
I got a few of those that I work with now. They have too many visions.
Yeah.
And yeah, I do. It's you have to have a balance. Unfortunately, some don't. Some are true visionaries. They have a new idea every day, and they're not bad ideas at all. But they have no idea how to work the ground game to get to the vision. And you know, in the world of EOS, you have the integrators. And that's the integrator's job, is to help get to where the visionary is trying to get to, because they understand tactically how to do things, but they work at a strategic level, driving tactics. And that is a skill. It's sometimes it's an innate in somebody, other times it's a learned skill.
How, what kind of cadence have you found over the years of dealing with big companies, Fortune 50s, all the way down to companies with less than 50 employees? Is there a cadence or a rhythm or a time commitment? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like, is there kind of a, if you do at least a day a month, it's better than, you know, but if you do 20 days a month, it's too much, you know, like that's kind of where my brain's going.
And what I do with what I've done and what I continue to do with most of the leaders I work with is, depending upon the scale, scope of their business, it's going to depend. Because as I tell folks, the higher up you go, the bigger the business, or the higher up you go in that business, the more time you have to spend at that strategic level on the balcony. But that means you have to have people that can do what it is you've been doing down below. I had a conversation yesterday with somebody about this, and this was just a friend that's, I would say he's a junior executive within a large company here in town. And he moved into this new role. And he's like, dude, he goes, I'm trying to figure this out. They keep telling me I need to be more strategic. And I'm like, well, let's walk through this. Let's talk through it. And I ask a few more questions, and I'm like, okay, so do you understand the decision that you're making in terms of the impact that it can have on other areas around you? He goes, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, when your team of engineers design something, are they designing it with the impact in mind of how other organizations within your business are going to intercede with it? And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, then it sounds like you need to spend some time on the balcony. And he just kind of shakes his head. And what are you talking about? I'm like, you got to quit doing the business. We talk about it. Quit working in it, start working on it. You can only do that from on top. And I said, you got to step up and start looking out at the stuff that you're doing and where the impacts are happening or can happen. And I said, you can't do that from down here. And, you know, I'm a guy I love metaphors. One of the best ones that I've ever heard in terms of that strategic mindset, or how a strategic leader works, is that you've got an army moving through a jungle, and you've got the COO out front with the machete, busting his way through the jungle. But you got a guy, typically the CEO, that's at the top of the trees, going from one top to another top to another top. And I said, you need both, because the one at the top is telling the one down below, go to your left, because they can see. The COO has no idea where he's going. He can't see anything other than the tree that's right in front of him. So the CEO is the one that has the vision. They know the direction. They know which way to go. They're giving that information down below to the ground. You cannot see when you're down on the ground. You can only see what's in front of you. But that requires a very intentional action to slow down, pull out, step up.
You shared the story of your friend a moment ago. Whether your friend or similar scenarios, how does delegation fit into all of this strategic mindset?
The easiest answer for that for me, and it's one that I used to use with senior executives, is look at the value of your action. And I said, because it's not that tactical activities don't have value. They do. They have incredible value. But that strategic activity carries a lot higher value because it has broader impact. And the way that I would always explain it to a senior executive is, how much do you make a year? And they'd tell me, and I'd say, divide it by 2080. And they go, okay, it's this. I said, that's your hourly rate. Now ask yourself if what it is that you're doing is worth that amount of money. And they just kind of know, well, no. And I'm like, well, then you shouldn't be doing it. You should be delegating it. And I said, because that tells you that you're working at a level that you shouldn't be working at, which means you need to delegate it to the appropriate level.
Love it.
And help people understand that.
And Bo, that formula works for any size business.
Yes, it does.
Now, you could argue if you're a solopreneur, you kind of got to do it all because maybe, but you still need to do the math and go, okay, I could be making $100 an hour, installing gutters, whatever it is I do, but I'm doing something I could pay somebody $15 an hour to get done.
Bingo. I mean, the gig economy that we're working with now inside of, you can get almost anything done virtually for pennies. And it's, you have to consider that. And our businesses have to consider that.
I don't know that I've talked much about this with my clients over the years, but we have, and I'll go to that here in a second. But this idea of, so many leaders say, I need more work-life balance. Well, pay somebody $15 an hour to do what you're spending $100 an hour to do.
Yep.
Or $50 an hour. Even if you're only grossing, $35 an hour and you can get somebody to do it for $15, that's still a better deal, and get some quality of life back. Yeah, your income might go down $15 an hour because you're paying somebody, but I think you need to seriously assess that.
Well, and there's choices that we all make. And when I hear that from a leader, and you're exactly right, I'll ask them, well, where are you spending your time? And they say, well, I have to do this. And I'm like, well, if you want work-life balance, it's going to require that you sacrifice something. Right now, you're sacrificing your work-life, your family. And I said, you're giving it to work. So you've only got 24 hours in a day, and you've only got a certain amount of energy. Those are the two things, the only two things that you have control over that are limited quantity.
People in the personal financial management often talk about, live within your means. Yep. Cash-wise. Well, there's such a thing, live within your means time-wise.
Time-wise and energy-wise, absolutely.
And I don't know if it's unique to America or if it's worldwide, but certainly, I've lived through the 80s, 90s, and on in business world, and every decade there's a bunch of people that are trading way more time than they should be.
It's funny. I go back to my military days and spent a lot of time all over different parts of the world, a lot of third world countries. But it's interesting because when I go back in like my time in the Philippines, the people in the Philippines didn't have a fraction of what we have, but they actually had better lives in many cases. Yeah. And part of it was they knew what was important. And that's how they made their decisions. And it, again, goes back to that strategic mindset. If I know that family is important to me, I've got to make decisions in a way that allow me to make sure that I have time with my family. And a decision that I make right now may impact how much time I have with my family over the weekend. I've got to think about that. Yeah. And that's that timed thinking that I was talking about.
Probably 7 or 8 years ago in a CEO forum that I was leading, I challenged the leaders to look at their time and anything you're spending 15 minutes or less on. And I just threw this out there as a blanket challenge. I said, look at your calendar. Anything you're spending less than 15 minutes on, you need to delegate it. I had a few of them of fairly good sized companies not happy with my comment. They were, I was actually taken back by the reaction in the room. And I figured they'd all be like, oh yeah, Joel, that's brilliant. No problem. They were not going to let those 15-minute things go.
Nope. They're not. And part of that is just, that's what we do. And if I'm changing what I'm doing, we're talking change management now. We've got to create the need for it. And until they feel it, they don't need it. And it goes back to the feeling again. When that 15 minutes starts causing pain, they may be willing to look at it. But until that 15 minutes is causing them.
I'm sitting in a room full of CEOs and I'm like, well, these are clear-headed thinkers. It's just going to click with them. They're going to go, oh, that was awesome exercise, and no, I didn't even expect it to go that direction. I wasn't surprised, when I reflected back on it minutes and hours and days later. I was like, well, of course it was going to go that direction, but in the moment I was like, this is a brilliant idea. We'll do this exercise real quick. And
well, see, here's and I think I said this in the last conversation you and I had. The one thing that I've learned about leadership in all the years that I've been doing this is that the stuff that we talk about is actually pretty simple. It's just not easy. That 15 minutes, moving it out is pretty simple. It makes sense conceptually, but it's just not easy.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other piece to this is that the stuff that I'm talking about in terms of that strategic mindset, unless it's innate to you, unless it comes naturally, it's not easy. It requires you to slow down. It requires you to think differently. And you're stretching muscles that need to be taught, need to be toned, need to be grown.
You didn't use this word at the beginning of the podcast, but I think it's synonymous with some of what you were saying, this idea of comfort, right? And so I'm thinking as you're sharing, and I'm picking on those CEOs for not letting that 15-minute thing go. I was thinking about my own life. Where do I go when I just need to be productive? I go, do an Excel spreadsheet because I've been doing it since I was 20-something years, 21, 22 years old. And so it's a no-brainer for me.
Why does that not shock me?
And so like, oh, hey, I need to be productive, but I really don't want to do a lot of thinking right now. Let me do this Excel spreadsheet. I'm still contributing to the business, but I could pay somebody $15, $20 an hour. I should be raising up another 20-something-year-old and show them how to do the Excel spreadsheets, right?
And that's the easy part. The hard part would be to not do it and figure out what you need to do. And again, we live in a world and in a culture that's driven by two things, comfort and convenience. It drives almost all of our behaviors. And both of those things that you just talked about feed that. It's uncomfortable to do something different. And it's inconvenient because it's hard
to change up my schedule.
Yeah.
Where do you think people should start? You mentioned the idea already of take your annual salary, divide by 2080. Great idea. What other places might they start to exercise this muscle? The strategic thinking.
This past month in our C12 content, we spent time with our members really dedicated to understanding robust good health. And I told my members, in the 6 years now that I've been associated with C12, I've looked at robust good health and I've never really given it a lot of thought. I always had it as some aspirational type goal. And so this one was a very educational content segment for me because it made sense. And when I sat down with my members, I painted this picture. I gave them 3 different scenarios. Piece of machine that costs $1 million and it produces X amount of pieces per week at X amount of profit. And I said, this is its maximum capacity. I said, if you run it at maximum, it'll last 5 years. I said, now let's look at scenario 2. Same machine, but we cut back the production. We take it down 20%, but you get 50% more life. Third one is we take it and we cut it back even more. And now our life is doubled on the machine. Which one is the best scenario? And of course I had one immediately, like, oh, what's number one? I'm like, okay, maybe. I said, here's the thing. If you are ready to replace that machine in 5 years, yeah, you can max it. But what if that's not where it is you're trying to go? And he's, what do you mean? And I'm like, how long is your business going to be around? Well, as long as I'm around. I'm like, well then, so you want to buy a new $1 million machine every 5 years? And I'm like, well, why not go to scenario number 2, and then year 5, when you would be ordinarily buying a new machine, start putting money aside for the next one. That way you don't have to finance it. You can pay cash. So you're not impacting your production. You're still getting the same amount of profit. And I said, but you're extending it. And he was, oh, no, we're going to go maximum. I'm like, I know you will go maximum. But it got the others to thinking.
Well, that's the whole purpose of the exercise, right?
It was.
Regardless of the answer.
Yeah.
Think
because
about
there
it.
is no right or wrong answer. It just depends. Consultant's favorite response. But it was, got to use that moment to say, we have to understand our business. And I said, understanding what robust good health is for our business in each one of these 5 areas forces us to understand our business in a different way. And I said, this is probably one of the best exercises that you'll do all year. Because it's going to force you to look at your business differently, more strategically, how all of this aligns.
I wonder if we replace machine with human.
Yeah.
My life.
Yeah.
I can work 100-hour weeks and shorten my lifespan, or I can cut that back to 50 or 60-hour weeks, have a little bit more time with my kids and my wife, have a little bit more time to give back to the community.
Yep.
I think the research would say my lifespan's likely to increase.
Yep, I would agree.
You know,
and that was the second example. I said, talking about $1 million machine, let's talk about a $60,000 employee. And I said, yeah, you could probably get 60 to 70 hours worth of productivity out of that employee, but for how long? What
I found, there was a season where I chose to work 100-hour weeks climbing the corporate ladder.
Yep.
And what I found was somewhere around 60 or 80 hours, each additional hour was less and less productive.
Law of diminishing returns.
So over 100 hours, I was only about 80 hours effective, which was still twice, what everybody else working 40-hour weeks was.
Yep.
But, I was in my mid-30s, and I said something about having 20 years of experience. And they're like, haven't you only been in the marketplace since your early 20s? And I'm like, yeah. They say, how do you have 2 decades of experience? It's like, because I've been working 80-hour weeks.
Yeah. Yep. And that's that law of diminishing returns applies to so many different things. And it was something that I've looked at with a lot of my execs that I've worked with in the past, because they cram everything they can into a day. And I'll ask them, I'll ask the question, what time do you start? And they'll say, 6 or 7, okay? And I'm like, at what point do you think you become less productive? They go, what do you mean? I'm like, the amount of effort that you put in and the product that you put out, at what point does that effort and product start to come close? And invariably, they'll have to stop and think, and they'll think through a normal day. And what the research shows is that if they start their day at 7:30, 8 o'clock, that the law of diminishing returns for most people is going to hit about 1:30.
Really? I would have guessed 3. So.
But here's the magic part of the law of diminishing returns. You can apply this to machines as well. With people, if they take a brain break about every 70 minutes, just a 5-minute, get up, turn this off for a second, because they're thinking. They're using their thinking brain at work. Turn it off, go get a cup of coffee, have just a regular conversation with somebody. You do that about every 70 minutes. Now you've taken that law of diminishing returns out to about 3 o'clock. That's all it takes. So you think about that with a machine. If you give it a break, just give it 5 minutes to rest at different stages of the day, what can happen in terms of the law of diminishing returns. But again, you've got to be able to step back and really start to look at things differently and have a different mindset to be able to make that kind of calculation.
Have you seen any benefit to people like scheduling the strategic thinking?
Yep.
In other words, I'm going to take a day a month for this. I'm going to, like I got a new PC in my office. It comes up and says, hey, you've been sitting here too long. You need to take a break, right? So I'm using automation to actually block hours on my calendar, block days of the month, the automation in the PC to remind me to take a mental break and literally a timer comes up. I'm sure some of the viewers are going, duh, Joel, that's been around, for months now. But literally you click a button, a timer comes up and it's like, okay, get back to work,
Yep.
and
yeah, I've got an app that does that for me when I turn it on. I've learned how to turn it off. But yes, and I won't tell folks, I won't suggest that they take a full day. There are times to take a full day, but it's not typically going to be for that strategic thinking, that balcony time, because too many things can happen inside a full day. What I try and do is get them to start small. Give me 2-hour sessions during the week. Schedule it, block it, tell your admin, nothing touches this unless the building's on fire. Mm-hmm. This is my time. And another friend of ours, Daryl Evitz, gave a leadership series talk about fifth gear. And it's just being laser focused. And that's what that time is. You're laser focused on one thing. And it's seeing things bigger than what you see when you're on the ground. Really taking the time to analyze from a 50,000-foot view of everything that's going on in your life or in your business and figuring out what's going in the right direction, what's not, based off of where it is you're trying to go, and to make decisions.
I'm trying to recall her name. A lady spoke at GLS a few years ago, Global Leadership Summit, and she was talking about creating white space.
Yeah.
And she gave the example of Bill Gates looking out the window for 15 minutes, just looking out the window.
Yeah.
And the whole idea was he's trying to create that white space in the middle of a busy day. Mm-hmm. And then she gave some other examples of other, well-known people that have similar habits. How do you see think of the most successful leaders that you've seen that do this well? How would you describe what do they have? Have you noticed any similarities or?
Yeah, I have, in the sense that most of them are very intentional. They know what they need in terms of what it requires for them to be able to step out and step up. And some actually leave their office. Some, for me, I go to a coffee shop and put in my earbuds. That allows me to do two things. It allows me to absorb energy because I'm an extrovert. I need other people around me. Doesn't mean I need to be engaged with them. Mm-hmm. That takes energy.
You need the
away.
vibe.
I need the vibe. I need that. So I get the energy, but then the music drowns out everything. Okay, and I listen to music. I don't listen to a podcast because if I'm listening to a podcast, I want to hear somebody talk. If I'm listening to music, it's just noise. But that allows me to sit back with my thoughts. And that's what Gates would do, is he's looking out into nothing, but he's thinking. And he's alone with his thoughts. And being alone with your thoughts, you start to analyze what's going on in you and around you. And again, it allows us to examine why we're feeling what we're doing. It's a very intentional habit that I think most successful people have figured out how to do. They all do it differently. It's based off of you and what you need to do, but it's intentional. It doesn't happen by accident.
The people that you see do this the best, is this a daily thing, like Gates looking out the window for 15 minutes? Is this a weekly? Does it depend on the person?
For me, what I've seen, it depends on the person and the need and the stage of life that they're in, the size of the company, things like that. All of those things are variables. The thing that's consistent, though, is the intentionality. is they've taken time, or they're taking time to figure out what it is that they need to be able to do this. And for some, they don't take a day and sit in their office. They may take a day and go somewhere. I've got an old business partner that would take 2 days off about once a quarter and go to a hotel by himself. And all he was doing was reviewing his plans, looking at everything that's been going on, looking at where he was planning on going, where he's trying to go, and he's putting it all together. But he had to step out of the whirlwind, so to speak, and step away and be able to look down and really just dig in. And so in his case, he was examining and strategizing. And for him, it took a day to 2 days of being able to pull out and do that. He did it extremely well. That would drive me crazy, because after a few hours, I'm ready to move on to something else, and then I can come back. But I've got others that do it regularly on a daily basis, similar to what you were talking about with Gates. Is they'll come in at 5:30, 6 a.m. in the morning when there's nobody else in the office. That's their time. They're not doing the quick check off the box things, getting stuff off their desk. It's dedicated to really sitting back and examining what's been going on, and is it in line with where it is they're trying to go.
As an executive coach, one of the things you do well, and I've experienced this myself with you and I in conversations, and even already on this podcast, what are some great diagnostic questions that somebody who may be practicing this strategic thinking, or maybe they're not practicing it, but are there 1 or 2, 3, whatever number of questions that that they might, let's say they wanted to get started or they wanted to up their game, what they carve out the time, where do they start? I
think for me, you start with something very simple, and if you've got a decision that you're faced with, you're looking at the decision, you have to intentionally look beyond the decision. And you ask yourself, it's almost scenario planning of sorts. So if I go this way, what's going to happen? What do I think is going to happen? Most people stop there. So the next question, the untrained question, the one that we have to intentionally ask is, okay, if that happens, what happens? And if that happens, what happens? So we're starting to now examine the ripple effect. So, but what's happening is you're actually stepping up above as you ask those questions. You keep asking, what else? What else? What else? So you start to see it. And now, not only do you see unintentional impacts, but you also see direction. And I make the decision here, and I see these ripples. Well, I'm in line with where I want to go by making this decision here. But guess what? These ripples, they take me off. Or they actually break something in the middle of the line that I'm in. So that's the first step, is talking about the what ifs. And so really examining it.
You've given 2 examples so far that we could apply that to. The supervisor back in your HR days with the big company, manager comes in and says, I want to fire this guy. Now, you took him to root cause, right?
Yep.
But if he were doing this on his own, he goes, okay, what if I fire Joe? Then who's going to cover his hours? And then how long is it going to take me to find Sally to replace him?
Yep.
And how much is it going to cost me to train her? And how long is she going to be inefficient? And who, in firing Joe, there's some people that like him. How's that going to, so that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, it is. And that's the look forward. That's and that is more strategically minded. If I fire Joe, what kind of message is that going to send? What's that going to do culturally with where it is I'm trying to go? Is it going to build trust? Is it going to take away trust? Most of us never stop to think about those kinds of questions. Again, we're thinking about that immediate need or feeling that we have, and we make our decision based off that.
The other example you gave with the machines, right?
Yep.
Is, okay, if I buy this machine that's going to tie up, do I have the cash to pay for it? And these are some questions people probably ask themselves, leaders would ask. But to take it to the next step, where else could I spend that cash?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going to spend $15,000 a month on this item, is there someplace else $15,000 gets me more bang for my buck, right?
It's an opportunity cost.
And then, okay, if I do decide to bring in the machine, where am I going to put it?
Mm-hmm.
Do I have the space for it? Do I have to move stuff? Who's going to run it, right? So that's what you're talking about. So ask yourself those what if questions, and it may go down several different rabbit trails, but then you start to have a better understanding of the impact of this decision.
And the danger with doing that, though, is for some people, they can get mired in that. They'll keep asking the what ifs.
Yeah.
And part of it is because they're afraid to make the decision, or it's just not, unless they're sure, they're not comfortable. So this goes back to comfort. This is a way to avoid discomfort, is by not making a decision that I'm not sure of. So again, a feeling's driving an action. And we have to, part of this, we have to know ourselves. We have to know what our tendencies are. And that's what I used to spend a lot of time coaching with, is helping people understand their tendencies, because they don't know they just know them. I mean, they know what they feel.
Do you ever have a leader that you're coaching, and I'm not talking necessarily today, but in decades past, do you ever have them say, well, you hold me accountable for that, or you help me, or you make me do this?
Oh yeah. And I tell them, I said, you got to understand something. You make your decisions. I'm not going to make them for you. Now, if you make a decision, I'm probably going to pull a Dr. Phil out and ask you, so how's that working for you? I said, I'm going to hold you accountable, because I can only remind you of what it is you've asked me to remind you about. That's not really accountability, because you have to decide, does that matter?
It was, as you were sharing that, I reflected back on probably 15 years ago. I was consulting a company, and they were getting ready to make a very large. Every person in the company was going to be affected by this decision, every single person, and it included some vendors and software and hardware and all kinds of stuff. A big project, multi-month project, and the owner calls all his executives in, calls me in, and he goes, well, we're down to these scenarios. Which one would you pick? And I said, I won't pick one. I'll help you get to two. But the final choice has got to be yours. You guys got to own this. And so I think you mentioned earlier, I thought you were talking about they get caught up in the mire of it. And it's the old phrase, paralysis of analysis, How do you help people break out of that if you see them going that?
I'm going to give you the consultant's answer. It depends.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll just ask the obvious question. It's like, well, why don't you make a decision? And, well, I don't know the answer. I'm like, are you ever going to know the answer? You just have to pick an answer. You have to do your best and recognize it could be wrong. But it's not a bad one unless you don't learn from it.
Do you think that's generational? Like our grandpa's generation could make decisions and the young kids today can't? You see any of that?
I think it's more stylistic for us. If you look at personality types and behavioral types, things like that, there are types that are much more prone to the paralysis analysis. They're looking for the perfect outcome. I'm the 80%er. If I can get to 80%, I'm good. I'll just learn. If it's not the right decision, I just won't make that one again.
Would you say that's a trait that can impact somebody's rising through the ranks of leadership?
Very much so. And I would tell you that over the years, that's been one of the primary outcomes or goals that have been set with a lot of my clients is that higher level thinking. And you'll hear it described different ways: strategic thinking, higher level thinking. And what I've had to learn to do is the person that's setting the objective, I've asked them, what does that mean to you? Because there's a lot of people that love to use that word, the strategic, but they don't always understand what strategic is in the same way that I understand it. So I've learned to ask the question, but it's, it goes back. There's a book called The Leadership Pipeline, one of the seminal greats, that talks about how we promote the best to the next level. The problem is the next level, they're not using the same skills and attributes that allowed them to be the best at what it was they were doing. Plus, we never teach them to think at that new level. They get to that new level and they have to figure it out. And in that higher level thinking is all about looking downward. It's looking out and looking down. When you're on the front line, you're only looking out. There's nothing to look down at. You're not looking over a process. You're looking at your piece of the process. When you get to the supervisor level, now you're looking probably at multiple processes, a few. And so you're looking out, but you're also looking down over a few. Every successive ladder level that you go to, you're looking at, you have bigger scope up underneath you. You have to learn how to think at a higher level and recognize it's no longer just about what you can see here. You have to look at what's down below what you were looking at and keep going, because there's a ripple effect. Another thought that came to mind while you were talking a moment ago goes back to some of my corporate days doing change management. And this was really where I started to understand systemic thinking and strategic mindset. Is good change management uncovers stuff that we don't see before it ever happens. So what we would do is we were taught to do a change analysis where before we made a change, we would bring all potential stakeholders together. And we say, if we do this, what happens to you? And they would say, well, this happens to me. It impacts me this way. And then the next person would go. And then what we'd find out is typically we were missing 3 or 4 other stakeholders that we didn't realize were stakeholders. And by doing this type of analysis, we were able to understand the potential impacts of the change and recognizing we still needed to make the change, but it allowed us to mitigate the impacts or provide the training or provide the tools or whatever it was that was needed to make sure that the impacts didn't become problems. That was an example, probably the cleanest example of a strategic mindset, strategic decision-making that you could make. And that's why most change management doesn't work well, is they don't do that.
They don't get everybody involved.
No.
That brings up a good point. Regardless of the size of the organization, I don't think you said this, and I certainly don't think it's your heart, the CEO or the leader can't make these decisions in a vacuum. Yes, they need to go look out the window for 15 minutes a day, right? But that's not the end of the process.
Right. And sometimes you have to make it in the vacuum. You don't have time when the building's on fire. You don't have time to get input to figure out which is the right exit. You just have to make a call. Hopefully it's the right call. That's the unfortunate side of leadership.
Oh, that's part of it.
It is. But yes, you're absolutely right. How
often do you, percentage-wise, are we talking less than 1% of the time?
Less than 1%.
Okay. All right.
I'm just saying, I never say always.
Right.
And because of that. But, a leader's job is to make decisions with the best information that he or she can get. Now, best is a qualified word, depending upon the person. And, for me, it doesn't take a lot of information. I'm going to intuit some of the information. Some people don't. Some people will not listen to what they feel. I'm looking at what I feel and what I'm learning and what I know, and I'll make a decision based off that. And I'll be ready to pivot if I need to pivot. Other people, not so much. When they make a decision, they're going to stay true to that. Therefore, they're going to it's going to take them longer to make a decision. They're going to require more information. But we do have some, then these are the ones that are the hardest to work with, that think they already know what they don't know. And they think they know more. We see this in our political world. You've got people making decisions that impact millions of people, and they think it's what's best for them. They have no idea because they don't know us.
I was talking with a business owner the other day that there was some stuff in the legal realm, in the political realm, that was being pushed, and she went and spoke to some of the leaders in that deal and said, if you push this through, I have to take the 401k away from my employees. I have to do, and they're like, what are you talking about?
Yep.
And it's like, that's the ripple effect of the decision you're about to make. And, thankfully she was vocal, where a lot of people were just like, well, I can't fix it. And they actually ultimately made a decision that was in favor of letting the small business have a little more control over how they were going to spend their money. And so she was able to keep the 401k. She was able to, do these other things that people in her industry rarely do, right? She was going above and beyond, using her profits to actually make a difference in people's life and give back to the community and all, and really treat her employees well. But this new potential regulation was going to put a financial burden that she's like, well, it's got to come from somewhere, because I can't raise my prices in this economy. Maybe a little, but not much, not enough to cover that decision. And so your idea of bringing in the stakeholders is every good leader needs to do that, whether they're a politician, whether they're a CEO, whether they're a church leader, whatever walk of life they're in, leading a nonprofit, involving the stakeholders. I think that was brilliant. I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, and the other piece too is, and you were something you said just then just kind of brought this to mind, was, another thing with today's workforce, especially the younger ones, they have to have meaning to what it is they're doing. And the way that you help people have meaning is help them see what it leads to. Strategic mindset, recognizing that, when they make this can, they're not just making a can. What does this can hold? What's in the can?
What's your experience?
What's my all of those things, and what it can do to help. That's understanding time, and that's big picture. And our employees need to understand big picture. Some don't care about it. Some just want to punch a clock, and you know what? That's okay.
I think you're right. My experience has been, and I reflect back to just getting out of college. I was working for a big company, huge company, 30,000 employees or something like that. And they called us a site meeting. So all hands, from that 500 of us or whatever, and they bring in some of the corporate guys. And he says, anybody have any questions? And somebody's like, where's our product go? They didn't really care about the sales cycle or how he made decisions or, all the corporate stuff. They're just curious, like, I'm working on this thing. I'm making the can.
What does it do?
Where's it go?
Yeah.
I understand conceptually what it does, but where's it go? Why does it matter that I'm here? And that was in the late 80s, early 90s. So we talk a lot about this new generation, this young generation wants purpose. I think everybody does.
They
I
do.
think they just are more vocal about it
Bingo.
and insisting on it.
Bingo. They've realized that I have a voice, and they've been taught to advocate for themselves. That's the difference with the kids these days, is because I'm teaching my kids, you have to advocate for yourself. You can't expect a teacher to do what it is that you're expecting them to do. It doesn't work because they got 35 of you in the classroom. You have to learn to advocate for yourself the right way. And that's what I think we're seeing with this generation, is we're seeing more self-advocates. Sometimes good, most of the time good, sometimes not so good. Some of the things they advocate for just kind of scratch your head and go, okay, well, I know your mom and dad taught you to do that. So, although the mom and dad are going, I don't think I taught them to do that.
Yeah. Good stuff. Any final thoughts as we bring the show to a close?
You know, the big thing that I would share with folks, and I do all the time, is that when you're leading a company, you don't have the luxury of being able to make decisions from the weeds. You have a responsibility to make decisions from the balcony, understanding what's in the weeds. And for a business, depending upon the size and the level that the person is, there's a balance between how much time you spend down below and how much time you spend on top. And as you grow, you're going to see that balance change. You don't have the luxury of not doing that. You have a responsibility to do that, which means you're going to have to stretch. You're going to have to be uncomfortable. And good luck.
Thanks, Bo.
Absolutely.
It's great having you here again today.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of A Leader's Journey podcast. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up and remember to subscribe to our channel.